Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 15th episode of the Don't Sing podcast. Today I have Alexandra Freeman. She's a matchmaking dating expert. She's also co founded her own company, introductionsincorporated.com. And I'm going to give her a chance to explain how she got into this field and some influences and some things that she's learned along the way. So, first thing I want to dive into is kind of your upbringing and what that was like and how it kind of led you down this path.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Alexandra. Like you said, I'm a matchmaker. And I think that my early childhood had a huge impact in what I decided to do with my life. So I'm so glad you asked that question because my mother, who raised me, is a social worker. And she taught me compassion at a very young age.
Mhm.
So I always grew up knowing people's stories and understanding people on a deeper level than you might initially see. Like I remember a lot of the time we'd be driving down the road and we'd see someone begging or someone homeless. And where some people might have a certain instinct about that, my mom would be like, "Oh no, that's Stacy. Let's stop. I wanted to ask her a question."
Right.
So it really teaches you to examine people and relationships on a deeper level,
Mhm.
which is really important to me. So when I grew up and I got into matchmaking, that's what I hoped to bring to the industry. And that's what I do bring to the industry is that compassion.
Yeah, I think that's super important to place value on every human being, no matter where they stand or what their status is. That kind of compassion can be applied to any career field, but it's super, super important, especially in the field of matchmaking, because I assume in your field, um, paying very, very close attention to detail in every individual is probably very important when it comes to just matching one person with another.
Absolutely. I think that in my industry, it's almost something that has been missing. It's what
Hmm.
inspired me to start taking on clients. When I first got into the industry, I was doing marketing for other matchmakers.
Hmm.
And I saw a distinct lack of that compassion. And I
Right,
said to myself, I think I can do this better. So it's a very
right.
important part of my process, getting to know people, understanding their motivations, their goals, and how they approach relationships.
So when you were growing up and you noticed that your mother was paying such close attention to detail to people and showing them compassion, were you thinking in your head, this was the way that you were supposed to interact with people, or did you notice like a stark difference in how she treated people versus how other people were treating other people?
Well, it kind of came to a head when I was in school
Hmm.
because it was a very small town. I grew up in a very small town. So everybody knew my mother, everybody knew what she did. The social services was right across from the high school.
Wow, yeah.
So it's that kind of a small town, right? And so when people would go to mediations or go to difficult meetings, things like that with their families, people I didn't even know, kids I didn't even know, would ask me to come
Hmm.
because they felt like she's not an adult, but she's connected. You know,
Right.
she can help translate this experience to other people. And so, even from an early age, I was drawn into this kind of helping people and helping guide a situation. And I think it really impacted me. I knew that this is what I want to do forever. I want to help people.
Right. So when you got into your field and you're getting things kicked off, you're starting your practice. What were some early challenges you faced when it came to matchmaking?
Well, I was very lucky that I was already starting in the industry with the marketing, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
But, when you start a new aspect of any business, there's always challenges. Um, I did find that this compassion forward approach, you do have to balance with the realism of running a business,
Yeah,
you know? And
definitely.
it was hard to set that in my mind because I knew what I wanted to do, but then I also knew that I had employees to pay. So,
Yeah,
how do you balance that idea of I just want to help everybody with I also want to eat?
yeah. Yeah, that's a tough balancing act for sure. Um, but I find that people that are really passionate about what they do, they always end up finding a way, and they stick to it.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, I've been doing this for 12 years now, so I think I
Nice.
succeeded.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely say so. Um, when it comes to matchmaking, and you have two individuals, or you have one individual that's looking for a specific thing in another person, um, what are some key things you look for in terms of what would be the most compatible or applicable to that person?
Well, everybody's extremely different.
Mm,
Part of what I do is my all my programs are 100% customized to each client, and that's for a reason.
right.
Because how I approach somebody who is widowed and has been out of the dating scene for a decade and is maybe shy and nervous and has some trauma around relationships is very different than someone who's young and confident and loves dating and just wants to meet people.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's so varied and it differs so much client to client that there's no hard and fast rule
Right.
for how to approach each one.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. As you mentioned before, everyone needs that certain compassion and attention to detail. And when when you have two different situations like that, like you mentioned, a widow who is maybe a little trepidatious to start a new journey versus someone who's more young and eager, I could see how you know that could bring about different circumstances and maybe what they're looking for, maybe um, how much time it would take for them to get acclimated to finding another person. Um, what are
Absolutely.
yeah? What are some like I guess I don't want to like use the term um, red flag, but like when you're working with somebody, like do you notice things that they have to necessarily unlearn to get into a new relationship?
Yes, is the short answer. And the long answer is that you're right that red flags can be kind of a hard term. But what I like to say is we all have need in our life to grow.
Hmm.
How we are looking to grow and how much growth is needed varies from person to person, but even the most well adjusted person has room to grow.
Hmm.
So when you're approaching each client and you're sitting down with them and you're discussing, okay, who are you looking for and
Hmm.
what can you offer and all of these details, sometimes you do have to sit down and say, okay, this is, you've told me what you want. Now let's evaluate where you're at in your life and then look at that again and talk about whether or not you think this is achievable currently.
Right.
So, you know, I would say that everybody should have goals with dating and ways they want to grow. Some people need a little
Hmm.
more growth than others.
Yeah. And speaking of that, do you believe there is a certain time in life where somebody should be seeking a relationship, or in contrast, do you believe there are certain times in people's life where they should not be pursuing a relationship?
That's such a good question because relationships are such a foundation of humanity.
Hmm.
I personally believe that we have an epidemic of loneliness in America.
Mm,
And I
yes.
actually have a really cool statistic about that. So, 60% of Americans feel lonely on a daily
Wow.
basis. And
Wow.
loneliness is killing us, literally. So, it's associated with a 29% increase in the risk of heart disease and a 32% increased risk of stroke.
Yeah. Wow.
So, to take that back to your question, it's almost natural to seek out relationships, even if you're not in the most stable position, even if you're needing to grow more, like we discussed. But we're also seeking that connection because we're lonely.
Right.
So I would say that there's never a wrong time to seek a relationship as long as you're continuing to learn and grow as you go.
Definitely. I think having that open mind and always being ready to, take things at a patient pace is always the important thing, because when you're seeking a relationship, especially with intention, um, there's kind of this, everyone gets in the relationship, and then there's this phase of just bliss and happiness and novelty. Um, and I think the problem a lot of relationships have, no matter what age, is maintaining that sense of novelty and um, freshness to the relationship. What um, tips or insights have you learned throughout your years about longer term relationships, people trying to maintain a 5 year, 10 year, 25 year relationship?
Right. So, something I commonly tell my clients is I say, if you're seeking butterflies, you're looking in the wrong place. If you're hoping for fireworks and that extreme passion and chemistry, eventually you're going to be disappointed. I know that that sounds like, oh, you're taking the romance out or you're ruining the fun, but relationships aren't always fun.
Yeah, right.
If you want something long term and stable, you should enjoy your time together, but you should also be keeping in mind, is this the person I want to see me when I'm sick at 3 a.m.?
Yes.
And I need their help going to the bathroom, maybe, or something embarrassing, or, you know, am I happy to meet their parents? And those aren't fun questions, but they're important questions.
Yeah,
So if you're
definitely.
constantly seeking that freshness and that excitement and that new relationship energy, maybe you'll have it in the beginning, but eventually you're going to be disappointed.
Yes, that's a great point because when I think about not only my previous relationships, but just the overarching my generation of young men that are seeking and getting in and out of relationships, I think that that those fireworks, that initial spark of joy, is something that kind of becomes a cycle of um, just it's when someone gets bored, they're seeking out that next spark, that next um, sense of excitement, that those flushes of dopamine that you get when you are interacting with a new person. So I think we have to think more less in a romantic sense. It's hard to do that when you're interacting with somebody new, but I like the word. I kind of like the word partnership more than relationship because kind of
Yes.
more embodies what it is, and you're you're partnering with somebody, you're collaborating with somebody over the extent of your life, and not all those moments are as you said romantic or bring you fireworks and butterflies. They sometimes you have to humble yourself, you have to be there for somebody when they're sick or ill, and it's not always you know what you see in the movies.
Right. Well, there's this theory of relationships that basically for every uh, 5 awful moments in your relationship, you need 15 wonderful moments to compensate for that. So,
Mm,
somebody who's got a lot of highs and a lot of lows is going to have a lot more trouble than somebody who's got a steady relationship, maybe with a few highs and a few lows. So, when you're constantly seeking that passionate response that we were discussing,
mhm,
and not having those calm moments, you're setting yourself up for failure, right?
right.
And like you said, partnership, right? So partnership means compromise,
Yeah,
and compromise means calm.
yeah,
So you have to just, in my mind, in my opinion, you have to embrace that inner calm and take that to any relationship you're in. And that's the path to success, in my opinion.
yeah. That having that balance is very important. I've definitely been in relationships that have very, very many highs, and usually those relationships end up with very deep lows. And I think that also becomes a sort of cycle, almost an addicting cycle, because um, we as humans love to, you know, we love to make up, we love to, come back and replenish things. And sometimes we self sabotage our relationships just so we can, rekindle them at a later time. So, how can
Absolutely.
people kind of get out of that cycle of, um, sabotaging the relationship and then trying to make it up later, and then trying to just keep chasing that feeling.
Well, I think that that's a lot of self work, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's important to realize that, like I said, for every 5 of those awful moments that you put your partner through, it's going to take 15 to bring you back, not even above, but to a 0.
Right.
And in the end, that leaves scars in the relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
slowly over time, those are going to stop healing. And then the relationship will stop healing and then it will end, essentially.
Yeah.
So even though I know self sabotage, it's hard to rationalize your way out of, you may do it
Yeah.
unconsciously, but it's
Mm-hmm.
very important to have a conscious understanding of your own behaviors and why
Mm-hmm.
am I doing this right now? What is causing me to feel this way? What are the consequences of this behavior? And I know that
Right.
that sounds very basic. It's hard to actually put it into practice, but
Right.
without those fundamentals, you're going to keep hurting your partner and yourself in the long run.
Yeah. Speaking on those scars and that we sometimes leave in our relationships, what is your opinion on infidelity, and is that something that somebody can overcome?
I think that technically you can overcome anything.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean everyone can overcome everything.
Correct. Yeah.
In the end, it's up to your partner. Some people can overcome those things and you'll be fine, and then other people can't. There's no one-to-one answer there.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, in the end, it's not the partner who committed the infidelity. It's not up to them to decide whether or not it's going to work.
Right.
It's up to the person that was wronged.
Yeah.
But I think
Definitely.
that in the case that they're both willing to work on it, and in the case that that partner is willing to move forward, it is possible.
Mm-hmm. I was watching a podcast recently about relationships with a psychologist, and she brought up a very interesting point that I think a lot of people have very varying opinions on. Um, I want to know your opinion on it. When someone is entering a relationship and they have been dishonest and have committed infidelity in their past relationships, um, is it up to that person to be completely honest with their new partner and let them know that they have been dishonest in the past? Or is it better off that they just start anew and keep those things kind of to themselves? But if they don't plan on doing it again, just, you know, put their all into the new relationship and not necessarily bring it up.
That's a very interesting question. And I think that it's very case dependent, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Because, for example, somebody with a history of chronic infidelity, where this is something they struggle with regularly in relationships for whatever reason, then that's going to be a very different case than somebody who, in their very first relationship when they were 18, did something silly.
Right, right,
And also, there's so many factors, right? Like somebody who is in a talking stage with a girl and they've just become exclusive and it's a bit up in the air who cheats versus somebody who's in a 10-year marriage,
right.
right? So it's going to depend on so many factors. But my personal opinion, when I enter into relationships and when I coach my clients in their relationships, my recommendation is it important to you? In
Mm-hmm.
fact, if you're even asking me this question, that tells me it is.
Right,
The fact this has even come up in your mind or has become contemplative for you in this new relationship tells me it's something you need to discuss.
right. Yeah, I think that open communication is what keeps relationships going and keeps them honest, because a lot of people, we like to people please. We like to keep people in a happy state. And a lot of times that can bring a lot of, dishonesty and just being ungenuine because we want people to feel good. And I think we have to find that balance of being transparent and letting our partner know the things that we need. A lot of people, including myself, have definitely had struggles being honest in what we need in a relationship. And sometimes that can lead to a lot of just like suffering in silence.
Absolutely. So it's basically the issue of delayed gratification, right? So
Hmm.
we all know that if we go into a dating scenario with a list of requirements and an agenda, it's going to make those early stages harder. You're going to face more rejection. Sometimes
Hmm.
I have clients who are like, I want to have a baby in the next year.
Yeah, yeah.
And while I'm not saying that you should bring that up on the very first date, you should definitely be bringing that up fairly soon. And then they'll come back to me and they'll say, yeah, but then nobody wants to go on a fourth or fifth date with me. And I say, yeah, but let's learn that now, not
Hmm.
4 months from now when you're attached.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's that delayed gratification. You're going to go through the pain now rather than later. And that's what I tell people to really internalize is that either way, it's going to hurt.
Hmm.
But do you want to hurt a little bit or do you want to hurt a lot?
Yeah, that's a hard thing to put into practice for a lot of people because you want things to work out. You want things to be in your favor. But I think having that insight of very early of is this something that's actually gonna pan out or work is it's an important piece of information to have. You don't want to be 10 months or 3 years into a relationship and then find out the things that you were seeking aren't there because you were leading
Right.
yourself down a path. Um, can you speak a little bit about codependency and people that seek relationships because they kind of just are lonely and they want somebody by their side and they've kind of relinquished their standards to just have that person next to them because they are just so afraid of being alone.
Right. So, like I said, it's natural to seek out a cure for loneliness.
Hmm.
It's not the human condition to be isolated, and it hurts us. So, what's important is it's okay. This might be controversial, but it's okay to make compromises.
Hmm.
Things that were important to you can be set aside to a certain extent. What is valuable, though, is to keep your very core beliefs in mind.
Hmm.
So have your things that are uncompromising. For example, like I said, if you know that you don't want kids, 100% never going to happen, don't compromise on that. But maybe you can compromise on other things
Right.
because it's okay to not want to be lonely. It's
Yeah.
normal, it's natural. And just because you're trying to fill that hole doesn't mean you need to give up who you are.
Right. Yeah. Having your principles in place is very important. Um,
Right.
and like you said, I think compromise is um, something very important as well. I think compromise is it kind of has a negative connotation attached to it, but I think in some ways compromise can be ways we can show affection for one another, um, showing that you're willing to sacrifice certain aspects of things you were used to before, um, just out of your love for that other person. I think that could be a very beautiful thing if it's not overdone. Um,
Absolutely. I'm a
yeah.
huge advocate for a holistic approach to dating. And
Hmm.
what that means is that you just can't go too far in any direction. Compromise has become a naughty word in dating because people have taken that too far and given up those core values that I
Yeah.
mentioned, right? Where they just subsume themselves in the relationship and suddenly they don't know who they are anymore. And the
Hmm.
instinct is to run all the way to the other direction and say, this is exactly who I am and I'm not changing for anyone.
Right.
And what we have to do is kind of meet in the middle and have a realistic approach
Hmm.
to what is realistic, what's a good compromise, what am I willing to do for someone I care about or give up for someone I care about.
Yeah, definitely. That balance is super important. Again, just like you said, meeting in the middle is something that's not always. not always at the forefront of people's minds because they wanna they 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 want to have what they want, but at the same time, sometimes people are a little kind of consumed in having that idealistic relationship. They want to look good. They want their relationship to appear like it's going a certain way, even though it may not be. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that reminds me of um, this new age of dating that we've entered in the last maybe 20 years of online dating and online interactions, trying to find a partner. Um, what are your opinions on online dating versus the old fashioned way people found each other?
Right. So, as a matchmaker, I am an advocate of traditional dating. I
Mm,
think that apps have their place and I understand the reason for them. But my problem with online dating and apps is it's kind of gamified the whole dating process.
mm,
It has just turned into yes, no, yes, no. Oh, I like his photo. Oh, I don't like his photo. Oh, took a photo with a fish. How embarrassing. Let's all mock
yeah,
him, right? And we all have that instinct inside of us. But the way that it's become lately has become so, I'm trying to think of the right word, but basically because we're constantly perceived in every aspect of our life through social media, through online dating, all of these things, we've created avatars of our true selves.
yeah,
And it completely lacks that connection that traditional dating used to bring.
yeah,
So you're struggling against the flow when you're online dating, in my opinion. And that doesn't
yeah,
mean there isn't a place for it, but it's very hard to not fall into that pattern of just swipe left, swipe right. Yes, no. There's no compromise in
yeah.
that. There's no back and forth. There's no discussion. There's just A or B.
Yeah, it's a very reductionist way to approach
Yeah.
a relationship and just interacting with people in general. It kind of, like you said, it gamifies it. And so you never really get that deeper insight on that person, how they really are in person. You're kind of just looking at this flattened avatar of an individual, which doesn't say too much about them. Um, in terms of online dating, how everyone's got a phone, everyone's looking at their phone constantly 24/7. What are some places that you've noticed over the years that good places to actually meet partners and go outside and find somebody?
So that's such a great question. The problem is it kind of depends on who you are.
Hmm.
I say that there's no 100% right answer to that because what I really recommend is you seeking out things that you enjoy and hobbies that you actually participate in. If
Yeah,
you like going to the gym, if that's like your 100%, I go 6 times a week, then that's the place for you to meet people. If
right,
you are into pottery, go to a pottery class. But if you're not into either of those things and it's a new scenario for you and you're kind of uncomfortable, then maybe you're not wanting to pursue dating in those avenues. It's not a good fit for you.
right.
So it really just depends on each person. My recommendation is find things you enjoy and do those things. Don't put the pressure on yourself of like, I'm going to meet single people here. I'm going to talk to women. I'm going to talk to men. Just say, oh, I'm going to a pottery class, and what happens, happens.
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed in my generation, with men and women, um, a lot of people they want things to kind of come to them, especially if they've been scarred or have had a bad experience in actively seeking out a relationship. They kind of sit back and say, well, that person, when I meet that right person, it'll just happen. It'll just show up. I'll meet them eventually. How active should you be in pursuing a relationship when you're pursuing it? Like, how involved a process should it be, or should it be more of a passive thing?
I think it depends on what's healthy for each individual person. If
Mhm.
you are obsessing over meeting people to the point where you're like how am I going to meet women today? What bar am I going to go to? What am I going to say? How many people am I going to talk to? How many numbers am I going to get? If you're thinking about this constantly 24/7, then you're probably thinking about it too much.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're too passive, if you're never thinking about it and you're not putting in any effort, and then you're sitting back and saying, why haven't I met anyone? What's
Hmm.
wrong with me? Then you need to make some more concerted effort. So, this is what I meant by it's such a case by case basis. It's so hard to
Yeah.
give advice that applies to everybody
Yeah.
because, in all honesty, in the reality of the world, that's not how anything works.
Yeah. It's not.
It really comes down to your ability to self evaluate. Are you able to be honest with yourself? Can you sit down and say, you know what, this behavior that I've been engaging in for the last 3 months is not ideal, and here's why.
Yeah.
And then you have to sit down and say, okay, what can I do to improve this situation?
Yeah. For sure. I think lately in the new age of social media, a lot of relationship gurus and people in that space try to give like this blanket advice of what you should do, what habits you should have to seem more attractive, or the right way to approach women, or the things you're supposed to say versus the things you should never say. And I think, like you said, it's such a case by case basis. It's such a interpersonal pursuit that you can't really get in people's face and say, you have to say this, you can't say this. If she does this, it will not work for you. I think that's too generalizing. Um,
It's
so
reductionist.
very, very much so. Um, so when you're in a session with somebody and you're working through them and trying to find the things that they want, but you also notice maybe they are approaching this the wrong way. You notice that they kind of have a underlying intention that may not be pure, or you notice that, oh, they just want to meet a certain type of person and they're not really open-minded to finding someone that's necessarily compatible with them. They just want to find a certain aesthetic in a person. um, what do you tell them to kind of like get them out of that, you know, typist type of thinking, like I want my partner has to look like this or my partner has to be like this?
So then what I would sit down and I would say is, okay, you want this out of your life. What is that going to look like
Hmm.
in 5 years, in 10 years? Do you want kids with this woman? Do you want to send her to school? What do you want? What are your goals? And in the end, it's not my decision what you're going to do with your relationship. If aesthetics are important to you, if you want that high class relationship that is going to look good on a vlog, and you find somebody else who shares that value with you, then more power to you. But
Hmm.
let's sit down and go every step of the way of what that's going to look like for your life for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And if at the end of that conversation you still feel the same way, okay, I understand. Then how do we make that happen for you? Because
Yeah.
it's not my job to judge what people want to do with their lives. It's my job to help them discover if that is what they actually want.
Right.
And if it is, how do they achieve that?
Yeah. Like you said earlier, I think it's it's about being honest not only with your partner but with yourself,
Mhm.
and realizing that this is not something that's gonna be, you know, if you're researching for a relationship, this is a lifelong partnership you're seeking, and this is something that it takes time. Things that are of great value take a lot of time. Um, what are your opinions on the alternative forms of relationships that we're kind of seeing more of today, in terms of maybe open relationships or polyamorous relationships? What are your opinions on those?
I think that those can succeed as long as you're coming from a position of self-awareness. Like I said, that's the most important thing. If there's anything anyone takes from working with me, it should be self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
You need to 100% know how you feel every second of the process, and then it will be successful. Otherwise, if you don't have that internal awareness, not even just these types of relationships, but any type of a relationship is not going to be successful.
Yeah,
So I'm not against it. I think that, anything can work for anyone as long as you're prepared to grow and deal with it as it goes.
definitely. Um, I've read that you have done a lot of traveling and have been a couple places in your life. Um, can you speak on some of the places that you visited?
Yeah, absolutely. So my business partner is from India,
Hmm.
and we were there for an amount of time. I did some schooling there, and his father actually does some traditional matchmaking in India.
Oh,
Um, it's not a business; he just does it within his community,
hmm.
and it was something so inspiring to see because it's this whole little network. They have a WhatsApp group of people giving their little dating resumes of this
Yeah,
is who I am and this is who I want to meet. And it was so interesting to see a different approach to dating because there they have a history of arranged marriage.
hmm.
And it was just so fascinating to understand a different cultural version of what I'm doing.
Yeah. That's a great point. Just the varying ways different cultures think about relationships across the world. It's very contrasting and stark. I mean, here in the westernized world, we approach it a certain way, but in other places and other cultures, they have their own way of matchmaking, and they view relationships and the roles they serve in relationships very differently. Um, what are some places on um, that you've traveled where you've noticed that um, they kind of have a healthier way of doing things versus how we do it in America?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say healthier because
Hmm.
everything has its pitfalls. Like, for
Yeah.
example, the Indian matchmaking that I was just discussing and the
Hmm.
Indian history of dating is when people are young, they're not very much encouraged to spend time dating. If you're spending time with someone of the opposite gender, the assumption is you're going to marry.
Mm.
And it can reflect very badly on you if you're spending time with the opposite sex. And the downfall there is then you're not socialized correctly and you have
Mm.
trouble interacting with people of the opposite gender in a healthy way. But in other places, for example, in Eastern Europe, there's a history of patriarchal dating and religion,
Mm.
like in a lot of Orthodox religions,
Mm.
right? So you get this upfront view of it where it's like every woman gets roses on Women's Day, or
Yeah.
every first date you're expected to have roses and romance someone and open the door for her and pay for the coffee and all these things. But then there's also this underlying issue of the patriarchy basically and how
Yeah.
women don't have as much agency. And then you have the West where you have a little bit less of that intention and a bit more of this idea of like, okay, maybe we'll split the bill on the first date and I can open my own door and all of that. But then maybe you're losing some of that romantic feel. So the very
Mm.
long answer to your short question is everything has its pitfalls and benefits. And
Right.
the best idea is to just do what works for you.
Yeah, definitely. Um, you reminded me of a common topic that people are always talking about on social media, and I think it's a very, I think there's a very simple answer to it, but that's just my opinion. A lot of people go back and forth on how first date etiquette and who should pay on the first date versus who shouldn't pay, or is splitting the bill okay, or and there's a lot of discourse in terms of like I think people are kind of taking these positions of like, well, a man has his role to do this, or a woman has the role to do that. But I don't think it really has anything to do with roles. In my opinion, I think whoever is the person that invited the other person to the place is the person that should pay, because you initiated the meeting. That other person would not be going on that date had you not reached out and invited them. So I don't see why they should pay. But that's just my opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. Personally, in my personal life, I, regardless of who is invited, always offer to split the bill or pay just because I think it's polite. That's my
Hmm.
personal opinion. My professional opinion is, and I feel like I'm going to keep saying this through this whole interview, is that it depends.
Yeah, definitely.
So, like, if a woman says, you know what, it's just really important to me that the guy pays on the first date, I hold that value in my heart and it's important to me.
Hmm.
Okay, then it's important to you. And then this is that delayed gratification we talked about. It's going to hurt you sometimes in the beginning because if a guy doesn't pay, then you're going to sour that relationship
Yeah,
because of your own internal decision. But in the end, when you finally find a guy that does pay and it works out for you, then you held that core value and that was your decision,
hmm,
right? And same with the opposite way. If a guy feels like he shouldn't have to pay, maybe he's going to run into some problems there.
yeah,
But at the end of the day, that was your core value and that's what you held on to.
yeah. I think it's like you said, it's that delayed gratification is super important because it's. I think people should be a little bit more um, open to finding out this information as early as possible, because I
Mm-hmm.
mean you might face some rejection, you might face more attempts in trying to find that person, but if something is super important to you and you're holding on to it as a core value, um, you shouldn't give that up. You should keep going through trial and error, and eventually you will come across somebody that will fulfill that value. But that doesn't even that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the person for you just because they paid for dinner one time.
Absolutely. And this is how we come back to self awareness, right?
Hmm.
So, in the end, the only way that's going to work is if you're honest with yourself.
Yeah.
So, if you try to convince yourself, okay, I'm a modern woman, it doesn't matter to me if he pays the bill, but actually inside you feel that it is, you're
Hmm.
going to keep running into situations where you're unhappy and you don't know why
Yeah.
because you're lying to yourself.
Yeah.
So you have to really sit down and evaluate constantly and relentlessly your own internal feelings and what you're feeling about every situation and why did I not feel happy after this date even though everything went well on paper,
Yeah.
right? So it's a lot of internal work and it's not easy, but it is necessary if you want to be successful.
Yes, it is. Um, in all your years of matchmaking, um, what are some of the best habits you've seen of thriving in healthy relationships?
That's a great question. Growth and that self evaluation we were talking about is my
Hmm.
absolute highest indicator for success. When I have a client come to me, I don't care what age, I don't care what they're doing, where they are in life, how successful, any of that, I don't care. Are you willing to take advice, to grow, and to constantly evaluate your own internal feelings? If you say
Hmm.
yes to all of those things, I'm going to take you on as a client and I'm going to love it because
Right.
we're going to be successful. So I think it's just a fundamental necessity that you evaluate yourself, evaluate where you want to go, and are willing to grow into a relationship.
Yes, definitely. Um, Having that growth mindset is important
Yep.
in all aspects of life. Just being open to learning and self analysis as well, being able to step back and evaluate your values and where you're being dishonest with yourself is very healthy to practice, because you can sometimes tell yourself you want one thing, but then when you get it, you realize that's not what you wanted. But a lot of people are very, we compare ourselves to other people a lot, and we see Jane and John over there having a great old time, and we want that as well. And sometimes we will gauge our relationship versus another person's relationship, and that's to me very unhealthy because, as you said before, it's very individualistic. It's so interpersonal that there's no way you can base your relationship off another two people's relationship. You have to have your own set of standards for your relationship and what you want for it.
Absolutely. The worst thing you can do is hold yourself to standards that don't involve you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're sitting here thinking, oh my God, I'm just a teacher and I can't afford this lifestyle, and I can't take my girlfriend to Paris for our honeymoon, and I can't do this and I can't do that. And that's all you're feeding yourself internally.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's going to come out negatively on your relationship. Instead of sitting and thinking, I don't actually like Paris. I
Yeah.
get sick when I go on planes. I don't want to travel. I don't need a lot of money. I like being a teacher because I like helping people and that fulfills me inside. You have to sit and think about these things and not let just the perceptions of society decide for you what you enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the end, if you seek out those things you're supposed to enjoy, you might find out that you actually hate them.
Yeah.
And then where are you?
Yeah. Right. How important is money when it comes to relationship? Because when I read the statistics, I see most divorces happen because of financial issues, and a lot of people are very trepidatious to get married because you have to combine your finances and you're basically relinquishing um, your sole control over your own finances. So, how important is money in a relationship, or is it even important at all? Are we looking at it the wrong way?
The thing is money is important, but not because of the reasons you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Money isn't important in the sense that you have it or you don't. Money is important in how do we handle problems.
Mm-hmm.
When something comes up financially that makes us struggle, how do we cope with that? How do we overcome this as a couple?
Yeah.
So the hard part is that when you have more money, you're going to have less struggle. So some
Yeah.
of these problems will not be as apparent as quickly, but they might be
Right.
apparent in other aspects of life. So it's not about money, yes or no. It's about conflict resolution. It's about, are we able to make good decisions together? Are we
Mm-hmm.
both able to decide that certain things are valuable or certain things aren't valuable in our life
Right.
financially? Are we able to care for our children? Are we able to do things that are good for us? That's
Yeah.
the important parts of money, not whether or not we have it or we don't.
Yeah. That's a very healthy way to look at it, because money is a tool, and you
Exactly.
it's not it shouldn't be the lifeline, the blood of why you get with somebody. It should be something that you use to maintain yourself and to do the things that you want in life, but also take care of the things you need, most importantly. um, and I think a lot of young people, especially people that don't necessarily have a lot of money, money becomes a very important thing to them in a relationship because they don't really have a lot of it, and but they want their partner to be happy. What are your opinions on um, people that use money to kind of foster relationships, to kind of buying somebody's love, or showering somebody with gifts because you like them, to try to make them like you?
I think that those kind of behaviors come from a place of insecurity.
Hmm.
I think that people who feel that they don't have value try to show their value in other ways.
Hmm.
And it will work or it won't work, but it won't make you less insecure. It
Hmm.
won't fix those internal feelings of unworthiness. Because at the end of the day, the relationship, just being in any relationship, getting women, getting men is not the goal.
Right.
And it's not going to fill that hole inside of you. Right.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
I don't shame anyone for doing what they feel they need to cure that loneliness. And I would just encourage people to understand why they're doing that and
Mm-hmm.
maybe start to work on feeling better about themselves and feeling more worthy, because in the long run, it's only going to benefit you.
Yes. Um, Again, that it goes back to that self-awareness. Like you said,
Yeah.
it might work for the other person,
Mm-hmm.
to do these certain things, but then you're still left with those holes. You're still left with that insecurity, and that will show itself over time. Um,
Yeah. And also
yeah.
from the other side of that, the kind of man or woman who is attracted to that, right? To that idea
Mm-hmm.
of this person's going to take care of me financially, that also comes from an insecurity, just a different kind of
Mm,
insecurity,
right.
right? This all comes back to just reducing it to this idea of, oh, she's a gold digger, or he's a
Mm-hmm.
passport bro, or all these words that we've created to just categorize all these different people, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, the answer is really these people are lonely and they're sad
Right.
and they're insecure. And I mean that in the nicest possible way, but they need to work on that.
Yeah. Definitely. Um, I guess my final question would be to leave on a um, positive note. For the people that are lonely and feeling a deep sense of aloneness and that are trying to fix those insecurities or patch those holes, um, what are good habits they can take to approach a relationship with not so much haste and, not just trying to patch that hole, but to actually, you know, assess that they have this insecurity or this hole in them and to go into a new relationship with that knowledge, but without, being too quick.
Right. So, my number one thing would be take a holistic approach. What other relationships do you have in your life that are not romantic?
Mhm.
And I know that not everybody has close friends or close family, but there should be some people in your life that you can draw from that's not just a romantic partner.
Mhm.
So work on building, even if it's a small friend group, some friend group, or getting close with a cousin or your mother or your father, whoever, I don't care.
Right.
But start building those relationships and filling those holes a little bit so that there's a little less needed to put on a potential partner. You're not putting as much
Mhm.
pressure on them. You're not using them to fill this giant hole inside of you. You're already starting to patch it up beforehand. That's
Yeah.
my number one recommendation.
Yeah, because a lot of the holes that we have come from learned experiences from our parents and our siblings, and they don't always come from romantic relationships. Sometimes they just come from,
No.
like you said, friendships and siblings and uncles, that treated us a certain way, and now we have this kind of hole that we need to fulfill. And then I'm glad you said that, um, fixing those relationships and analyzing those relationships can actually help you in your romantic relationship as well.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know how much you know about attachment theory, but we form attachments very early in life. Like from when
Hmm.
we're born till we're about 5, that's when we really start developing our internal attachments. And
Yeah.
if there's some disruption at that time period, you're going to be dealing with that forever, right?
Mm,
So it comes from so many aspects of our life. And then we come and we're 18, 19, 20, and we're like, okay, now it's time to be in a relationship. I
yeah.
come with all of this baggage. And
Yeah.
that's okay. We all have baggage, but you have to start at least understanding yourself and understanding what you need to work through if you want to be successful.
That's super important. Um, Alexandra, I really thank you for your time. You've been very informative. Your approach to matchmaking, I believe, is very balanced and it gives me a sense of realism and uh, being very realistic about the way we approach relationships and not telling ourselves a story or a fairy tale. And I like how you approach every individual um, on a very, very interpersonal level. I think it's very important that other matchmakers um, use that approach because we are all different human beings and we all have different wants and needs and requirements. And you've been a fantastic guest, and I again thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Noah, for having me. I've had a wonderful time. It was so good talking to you. You had great questions, and I appreciate you
Thank you.
having me on.
Definitely. Where can the people reach out to you and find you and keep up with what you're doing?
Absolutely. So, my website is introductionsinc.com, and you can reach out there for any matchmaking services, or you can find me on most socials at Matchmaker Alexandra.
Nice. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you have a great New Year as well.
Yeah, you as well. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living.
Bottom line, there were no weapons of mass destruction.
Totally unjustified and brutal invasion of Iraq coming up in Ukraine.
A new world order. A new world order can emerge. A new era.
No, don't clap, man, because I got more info.
And Hillary are demons.
Really, peace in our time.
Most people still want to run for vote.
Peace in all time.